Hello everyone. Today I will be featuring a ship many of you have been requesting, the Venezia, the tier 10 Italian cruiser. As always, thank you guys for dropping a subscription to my channel, I appreciate it, as well as those who take the time to drop a follow on my Twitch channel. Still trying to reach those 100k values so I can give a huge giveaway to you guys, still grinding for that number, so thank you very much everyone who's contributed and helped. Moving on, the Italian cruisers. I'm actually tabbed out, in case you're wondering. I'm kind of charging in and I get spotted by like 5 ships here. That's because I'm tabbed out and I was doing something else, and then I tab in and I realized the entire world wants to kill me. So normally I don't quite charge in this cluelessly in this ship. Speaking of the Italians, the low tier Italians are pretty terrible, honestly. The mid tiers, they're pretty eh. In general, I don't really rate the Italian ships until you reach the Amalfi. The Zara can be okay. The Zara can be pretty okay, mostly because of the turret setup. But the Amalfi starts becoming pretty decent. Amalfi, Brindisi are pretty decent slash good, and Venezia can even be very good at times. The ship itself sits at 51.8k health. And it's pretty standard, honestly, for these type of cruisers. We got the Des Moines at about 50.6, and then we got Henry at 53, we got Hindenburg at about 52, so you kind of fit into the rest of the pack. Surprisingly, the ship has a pretty good torpedo bulge, 28%, and which is actually pretty unusual for cruisers. They tend to be significantly squishier when it comes to torpedoes. In terms of speed, it's very fast for a cruiser. It does 36.6 knots, which with the speed flag that's 38 knots. That pretty much, I think it makes you the fastest tier 10 cruiser in the game. No, actually, oh sorry, I'm talking out of my... There's Henry, of course, with the speed boost. Henry's speed boost puts it way past 40, like 44 or something. And there's the same thing with the Colbert. Both of those ships, of course, get that amazing French speed boost. So, without the speed boost, you're the fastest ship in the game. But once Henry or Colbert press the speed button, well, yeah, then you fall down to third place. The turning circle is pretty decent at 760 meters, but I feel this turning circle is a bit misleading because, in case you haven't noticed, the Venezia is a really long ship. This is a long ship that's got a lot of broadside to give to the world. Speaking of a lot of broadside to give to the world, it's got a huge citadel. It comes pretty much halfway up to the deck. It starts in front of the front turrets and extends all the way behind the back turrets. Basically, the entire ship that you can shoot, the center part, the entire part is one big citadel. So keep that in mind. On the bright side, it does have a fair bit of armor on it. It's actually got this 40mm lower belt that extends all the way to the tip of the bow. So if you can bait battleships into shooting your lower nose and not your upper nose, if they shoot the upper bow, then they hit that 25mm plating, but the lower part is all 40. So you can actually be... It's much better than the Brindisi and the Amalfi, for example. Those things, they're 25mm all over, they're just squishy. But this thing, it has a fair bit of armor because of that 40mm belt, and it allows you to brawl and rush battleships much better than really any other cruiser. Now, keep in mind that the upper belt armor is still 30mm, and I think the deck was also 30mm. So, at range, of course, this only applies to close ranges. At long ranges, well, people with the big caliber guns will obviously still overmatch it. And HE has a field day on farming you because they don't really care about that belt armor. Going back to the maneuverability, the turning circle, 760 meters, the rudder shift is 11.6, which is a bit it actually creates this bit of a weird thing where, because Hindenburg, for example, has a worse turning circle but also a worse rudder shift, but this thing has a very tight turning circle, but it's a long ship and the rudder shift is pretty If you're used to heavy cruisers though, it's not gonna be anything that special. It just, it took me a time to get used to how to sail this thing. I felt it always handled a bit weird. I'm not entirely sure if that 760-meter turning circle is accurate. Little White Mouse has probably ran tests on that, so you can check her up in case she knows better. Concealment-wise, not really the best. Honestly, not really the best when it comes to the concealment. Well, in this case I'm being radared all the time, but the concealment on this ship isn't really that impressive. It's 12.4 with the full build. And the issue here is that the Venezia actually needs concealment a lot more than many other cruisers. I'm expecting to maybe see the Moskva here, so I'm loading some AP. Keep in mind that the Venezia AP doesn't have any special features to it. The pen isn't really that special. Your pen isn't going to be winning any prizes. I think, in fact, you only at around, what am I shooting, about 10 kilometers, you have about Des Moines/Salem AP pen. Nothing like the Zao, certainly nothing like the Moskva, who's absolutely wrecking me with it. He's got almost 100 millimeters more pen at this distance, so he has no issues punching through to my Citadel. You also don't have any improved penetration angles on your AP, so honestly, you're going to be struggling to punch through any sort of angled armor at all. Well, that's why you kind of have SAP, semi-armor piercing, which is something I will get into. The ship has a lot of guns though. We're talking 15 guns, 203mm guns, which is a ton. And it also means that your AP alpha damage is some of the highest. Not the highest, but some of the highest. You actually have the same as Hindenburg. Which, well, okay, that maybe doesn't sound too impressive. Of course, the likes of Stalingrad and Yoshino, these guys, they all do more AP damage because, well, they got bigger caliber guns. But matching Hindenburg in AP damage is not a bad thing, because Hindenburg is notorious for being a bit of an AP monster. Now, the thing that, of course, sets the Venezia apart is the ammo that I'm shooting right now. The semi-armor piercing. It is a mix of HE and AP. What that means is that it's HE that you can angle against, meaning if you angle well, you can bounce it. It can shatter, but it has improved penetration, so it punches through armor that normal HE wouldn't. It, however, can't start fires, and it basically doesn't break any modules ever because it doesn't have splash damage. It is, of course, incredibly good against destroyers. You can deal 15-20k volleys to destroyers because, well, you're dealing HE. Except it's HE, this SAP HE has a huge alpha damage. And when I say huge alpha damage, I mean Yoshino HE deals 5.1k, Venezia HE deals 5.2k, or Venezia SAP deals 5.2k. Now keep in mind that Yoshino has, what, 9 guns and you got 15, so the potential HE alpha you have is immense. It is by far the highest in the game, and this means you can literally delete not just DDs, but if you catch something like light cruisers and you get full pens with the HE, you don't hit, for example, the Citadel armor, you deal huge amounts of damage. Also, you got really good pen on this SAP. I think it's 54mm on it. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was 54mm. So of course something like Stalingrad with its 50mm deck armor will eat tons of hard hits. As you can see, it's actually very good at farming this thing. SAP of course has its limitations though. Not being able to start fires means that if a battleship is pushing towards you, you don't really do a whole lot. And then there's these certain battleships that are basically immune to you, like fighting Kremlin is such a pain in this thing, because Kremlin has 60mm deck armor, so your SAP doesn't pierce, and you can't start any fires, so if a Kremlin pushes in, well, Venezia runs away. That's pretty much your options. You don't really do a whole lot to him. So, very limited. The ship does have torpedoes though, which does enable it to do some YOLO plays, and they have a fair bit of range on them actually. I think the range is 13.5. That's not to say that the torpedo damage is anything that special. The torpedoes hit for 14k each, and they are only 56 knot torpedoes, so they're incredibly slow. But they're stealthy, and the cooldown is about a minute, so it's because of the range as well, 13 kilometers. You can kind of throw them out whenever you want, and every now and then you will catch random hits on smoked up Minotaurs, smoked up Smolensk, whatever DDs you might catch. It's basically it's a brawling tool and it's a spam ball tool. The weaknesses of the Venezia are quite a few though. Obviously I mentioned battleship pushing straight in, you don't have the torpedo power or really the HE power to stop them. Your AP doesn't have enough piercing to really push in a Citadel them like you could in, well, something like a Stalingrad or whatever. In fact, even at close ranges, let's say 5 kilometers, Venezia only has 372mm of AP penetration. That's not enough to Citadel battleships. You need to be literally point blank to have any chance, and well, most of the time you'll be deleted by them. The one tool that it has that is quite useful though is of course the smoke. The issue, you have a unique smoke, the Italians have a unique smoke, which is a crawling type of smoke, which means you can be in full motion while the smoke covers you. You'll see a pretty good example coming up here. I'm pushing in, but I'm not sure what's waiting in the Cyclone. It turns out it's a Republic. I instantly smoke up. And it's good like this, because if you kind of overextend, you get caught in these bad situations. It is a way to disengage. Of course, it's not by no means foolproof. You can't shoot, for example, in this well, you can shoot, but I can't shoot in this situation because your smoke firing penalty is massive. I think it's 9.9 kilometers in the Venezia, which is a 10-kilometer radius. So if I shot here, he'd just be able to shoot me. So I would negate the benefit of my smoke. There's of course also radars. There's people can still torp you, people can still shoot in your smoke. So it's not an invulnerability, but it is an okayish defensive tool for these oh shit type of situations. The cooldown is massive though. Even with this full build I'm running, it's still a 2-minute 50-second cooldown. And most of the time, this smoke has been a pretty niche extra. It's a nice bonus, but honestly, its utility compared to something like a radar is pretty limited. A radar is pretty much always useful. This smoke, sometimes. It might be okay, it might be beneficial, whatever. I load AP, because I see on the minimap a Moskva is pushing up, and 15 203mm AP shells pack a pretty damn hard punch. So, if you do catch ships by surprise in this thing, it is a very nasty surprise. Keep in mind, by the way, that I am running Sansonetti, and I think the Italian, it's pretty much a must-have special captain for the Italian cruisers. That perk I got was Triumphant Haul, which extends my range by 8 kilometers. That's another thing that is a bit lacking on the ships, and that is of course the range. The default range is pretty low for a tier 10 cruiser, and that's why I think Sansonetti is such a nice addition to the ship. The default range is 17.1 kilometers. So having Sansonetti give you that 8% boost does very much come needed, because then it boosts you to 18.5. 17.1 is actually, well, it's actually one of the lowest values. Most of the other ships that have these low values, well, they got other tools. Either the ability to hide behind islands, something you really can't, or smoke, or just some other tool to help them, whereas you're kind of stuck with, well, you have railguns that don't have a whole lot of range behind them. It can be frustrating, especially in these passive games, especially in standard battles or whatever open long-range maps. This is of course why Spotter Plane is extremely useful, and Sansonetti, when you do proc his special ability, getting 18.5 range is very important. Another huge reason to run Luigi Sansonetti is Expert Loader. I mentioned the reload on the guns is gigantic, but you get that improved Italian Expert Loader, which means switching between an AP and semi-armor piercing is much smoother. Without him, it takes you, what, 9 seconds to switch ammo type? That is far too long. For a cruiser, that's a lifetime. You need to catch a DD sailing past, you need to catch a broadside cruiser. Without Sansonetti, I thought Venezia felt very, very crippled. Having Sansonetti, just honestly, I think it's a must-have in terms of game enjoyment and ship enjoyment. If you don't have that Italian captain already and you want to play the Venezia, I highly, highly recommend grinding it. That the Expert Loader alone makes the experience so much better. We're still down huge amounts of points here. We are 340, well, we just got a kill. Well, we still have half their points basically, and we don't have any caps. So I'm trying to crawl the game back here. The ship has a fair bit of limits though. DDs, obviously, the DD limit is gigantic. You don't have any tools to deal with DDs. You have no hydro, you have no radar. And I often say that the Venezia feels really, really constrained in many situations, and this really is one of them, having to fight the DDs. Proc Desperate Resistance, but it sucks when you're being hounded by a destroyer in the Venezia. Because even though you're fast, you're not faster than a DD, so he's gonna keep you spotted, he's gonna keep harassing you, you can never use your smoke. That's really one of the most frustrating things, is you can never pop your crawling smoke because your smoke firing penalty is too bad. If a DD is around and you're spotted, well, basically your gimmick is completely useless. You have no hydro to keep you warned of his incoming torpedoes, and you have no radar to hunt him down. That's one of the reasons I actually have RPF on the Venezia, because I found it so frustrating to not know where the DD is coming from at least. I guess the idea is to balance how powerful SAP is against destroyers by giving it no actual personal tools of dealing with destroyers. That doesn't mean it's not a very rough experience. The ships in themselves feel constrained in many ways. They can be fun, you can have a great time, but the smoke gimmick, questionable. Semi-armor piercing, questionable. Not having any tools to deal with many of situations, really questionable. Another thing that is rough is the complete lack of AA. It has okayish AA, but its range is 4.6 kilometers. It's that garbage Italian AA that has no range whatsoever. This puts it, I think it might actually have the worst tier 10 AA because of that. Because it doesn't have any effectiveness at all. It's just, it's a joke for carriers. Ship glides, no gap, no convenient gap for me to dodge those smallest torpedoes. And we're gonna swing out and see if we can catch something off guard. It looks like the Kleber actually has potatoed a bit, and he's grounded, so you're gonna get a good example of what I spoke of with semi-armor piercing being extremely good against destroyers. Kleber, of course, takes a bit less damage than most DDs, but even against him, that was a flat 10.5k volley, and we only landed 11 of the shells. Dropping torps on the Conqueror. As I mentioned, the gun reload is so long you get plenty of time. Here you get to see Sansonetti, expert loader. Only 3.9 seconds with my current health, switching between semi-armor piercing and AP. And AP is of course really, really good when you catch ships of full broadside, especially cruisers, that is. In this case, I'm afraid of trying to rush the Kleber and Conqueror with the Smolensk on my broadside, because, well, torps coming from Kleber and Smolensk farming me. So at this point I make the choice, as long as the Conqueror's guns are pointed away, I'm gonna see if I can finish off this Smolensk instead. I sadly don't get the kill. Kleber takes this opportunity, sees my guns are pointed away, but my back turret is still pointed his way, so I throw a volley with the back turret, and now I should be able to finish the Smolensk, but the Zao actually kills him off. Scarily enough, the Conqueror is spamming HE, so that 40mm armor I spoke of, which is pretty good against battleships, doesn't actually do anything against him. But the fast shell velocity of the semi-armor piercing allows me to catch Kleber. It's an Italian thing that at least the one thing they kept from the Roma, and that is the really fast shell velocity. It absolutely has that. I proc Confederate, which for Sansonetti means 15% faster reload. I'm honestly a bit worried right now because my Zao is not very healthy, and I think this Conqueror can possibly one-shot him. I can't really smoke up and disengage, because if I smoke up, then I have to stop firing once again because of that smoke firing penalty. So what I instead decide to do is I'm just gonna pour as much damage in on this Conqueror as I can, take some attention away from the Zao. If the Zao gets close enough, he'll be able to YOLO torp him or just get enough damage in. With this 15% reload, of course, once again, Sansonetti helping Venezia so much. The damage output becomes pretty damn scary, especially since the Conqueror is giving us so much broadside. He gets more damage than I thought on my stern, but the amount of damage I gotten in on him is enough that my Zao really only needs 1 or 2 volleys. The Conqueror takes half of his remaining health with only his front guns, but the damage we poured in was enough, and with 1 minute remaining and being down almost 500 points, I think it might have been even more than 500 points, I need to double check, maybe less, whatever. We were about to lose, and we were about to lose hard, but in the very last second we secured the kill, and we managed to turn this game around. Now, 219,000 damage. High damage games aren't really that common in the Venezia. That doesn't mean that it does poor damage, it's more that it does consistently pretty average damage. You rarely have the worst of games, but you rarely get those monster games either. And I think it's because, well, you don't really get that fire damage buffing, or you don't get those huge torpedo devastatings, whatever, buffing your damage. It just doesn't happen often in the Venezia. So Venezia it doesn't have those swinging numbers that other cruisers might have, like in a Des Moines or whatever. You might get massive fire damage or some insane brawl, stuff like that. Venezia is kind of a consistent workhorse, and it doesn't make it a bad ship, but it doesn't make it that exceptional of a ship either. 2 torp hits, 3 kills, 10 citadels. We got 1 cap, we defended a bit of cap. More importantly, we got the Confederate, so we got to show off Sansonetti's specialty. Team score wise, almost 3k base, not quite. The Zao was the last remaining member on our team, but 1 is enough to secure the win. Detailed report wise, well, it's a mix of SAP and AP. No surprise, I shot significantly more SAP than I shot AP because, as I mentioned, the AP really isn't that special. You got good shell velocity, but you don't have any special AP penetration values. In fact, your AP pen is pretty bad. You don't have any improved AP angles. So, compared to semi-armor piercing, which has hugely improved angles. You can almost pen from any angle, and it does massive damage. It's a pretty simple choice, honestly. When you want consistency, you go semi-armor piercing. That's how simple it is. You can't start fires, that's the downside, but it's still worth it. Keep in mind, by the way, that the Venezia is the only ship in this line that has these semi-armor piercing angles. The Brindisi, the Malfi, every other Italian cruiser has worse SAP angles. And that's also one of the reasons why I often mention that Venezia is so much better than all the other ones. And I think it's a bit, that's one of the reasons I don't really like the design of the line, because the line goes from really terrible to okayish to good to Venezia, which is kind of in a class of its own. I still don't think it's that good of a ship, but it's certainly not a bad ship. It's a very consistent, strong ship, and of course, if you get your situations where the Venezia can shine, you get to surprise a destroyer, or you get to brawl a battleship that shoots that 40mm plating that you got on the nose, then it's hilarious. Or you get to smoke ambush someone and you get to pour 15 AP shells into like a Moskva broadside like I did there. Then the ship is a lot of fun. And in fact, that's one of the things they did nail with this. The ship is a lot of fun. Until a carrier shows up. Then the ship isn't very fun anymore. Because you have no AA, 4.6 km range, and you're a big long ship, easy to basically punish with every type of armament. So, but carrier being the fun police is probably not something World of Warships players are unused to. Let me show you guys my recommended build for this ship. Right, as usual, let me start with the modules. Consumable wise, premium damage con, premium heal, and I highly recommend you run a premium exhaust smoke because the cooldown on this thing is so damn long. It's a gimmick, but at least make sure you can enjoy it by not having to wait basically 4 minutes between them. I didn't speak about the heal. The heal is very much a standard cruiser heal. There's no special frills going on here at all. Upgrade wise, turret survival. Another thing I didn't mention, the turrets are actually stupidly squishy on this thing. It's basically 150mm at its best, and you got a whole lot of turrets. So if someone decides to start targeting your turrets, they explode pretty damn easily, and you will suffer a lot of turret breakage in this ship. So do run that. Another thing while we're talking about the turrets, if you're shooting someone close range, this second turret here can't actually fire because it's been blocked by the first one. So at close range, you're forced to give broadside, and your DPM is even more limited than normally. One of the downsides of Venezia brawling is if you have to go nose in against something like a Des Moines, your DPM is garbage. Not just because you only have SAP, but also because angled in you lose, what, 60% of your damage? So do not go into nose in situations with this ship. It is trash at it. Rudder survival, AA to boost your flak as much as you can boost. As I mentioned, your AA has issues here, and that's mostly the range. With 4.6 km range and the fact that the planes take their time to, or the AA takes their time to turn the guns and start firing, by the time your AA actually opens up on planes is somewhere around 4.2, 4.1 kilometers on a squad that's coming right at you. And for anyone who's being struck by carriers, 4.1 isn't exactly impressive. So you barely have time to throw up some flak, and then they're within your mid-range, and then they're already dropping you. So not exactly impressive. Improved rudder shift, absolutely. As I said, the turning circle is great, the rudder shift not so much. Concealment, 12.4. Not really that impressive, especially your detectability range by air is 8, which is extremely rough because, well, you're so easy to keep permaplane spotted, and most of the time you can't do anything about it. There's nothing worse in the Venezia than a carrier just leaving a fighter plane at around 7 kilometers, and then you basically have to sail 3 kilometers just to be able to shoot it down, being spotted the entire way. And of course, oh, I did remember correctly, it was 9.9. And finally, faster reload, because your reload is dreadful. 20 stock with the upgrade 17.6. And finally, we get to Sansonete. Obviously, get this captain as soon as you can. Makes the Venezia experience so much better. Priority target, followed by Adrenaline Rush, followed by Superintendent, followed by Concealment Expert. Basic cruiser build. Expert Loader, the improved Expert Loader, makes it so much better, and the Turret Traverse. That's my base build. At this point, there are some options. I think Jack of all trades is a pretty obvious choice. Now, I've been fiddling around with the last 4 points a fair bit. On the Brindisi, for example, I like to run Preventive Maintenance and Vigilance, because you don't have Hydro, you don't really have any tools, and turrets tend to break, as I mentioned. On the Venezia, though, I have been running RPF, and I have kind of been enjoying it, because, well, when you don't have any tools against DDs, at least having a pointer where they're sailing around can be very useful. So, I probably will recommend RPF for the Venezia, but I'm not gonna say it's the definitive must-have best perk. You don't really need last stand on the Italian. On the Venezia, it doesn't lose rudder or engine much at all, or I have not experienced that, unless you basically hit a torpedo to the stern, which is almost a guaranteed. Flag-wise, since you can't start fires, there's no point running the Victor Lima or the India X-Ray. Run the speed flag, run the heal, probably run the faster consumables. I wonder why I'm not running it here, maybe I ran out. Detonation if you can afford. Fire chance, not really that important. AA, your AA range is trash. Mostly you can go economy flags. The base important ones for this cruiser is absolutely heal, speed, and faster consumables. You have those three and you're pretty much golden. Let me show you quickly the armor layout that I spoke of. This is that 40mm belt that you can bait battleships into shooting. Keep in mind that it doesn't really exist all the way at the back on the stern. How can I show this? Here we go. You got 25 here. It does extend down here, but if they shoot right at your booty, you have this flat arse that will easily get overmatched. 40 on the broadside as well. Keep in mind this is spaced armor. Upper belt is 30, deck armor is 30. If we remove this, you can see that the internal citadel armor is actually 165. So you got spaced armor. You got 40 and 165. Not enough to deter for any sort of full broadside hits, but you can get some pretty trolley volleys when ships try to shoot your broadside. They might pen the outer layer, but then they bounce on the internal. So very Henry IV-esque. Anyway, that was my Venezia commentary. Next up, I will probably feature the Brindisi, followed by the Amalfi, and then I'm not sure if I even want to feature the rest of the Italian ships, because they get pretty damn fast. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for the subscriptions. Thank you for the support. I will talk to you guys later.